The first thing I noticed when I stepped into the mess hall of Kryvex Interstellar Academy was silence. Not a peaceful silence, a watching silence. Every head at every table turned toward me at the same time, and I felt hundreds of alien eyes measuring me like I was a strange animal that had wandered into the wrong enclosure. My name is Ethan Cole. I am 19 years old, and I am the only human cadet in this entire academy. Out of every species training here, from the armored krill to the six-limbed Osani, I am the smallest, the softest looking, and by most accounts, the weakest. I walked forward with my bag slung over one shoulder, the strap worn thin from years of use, and I did not look away from anyone. That was the first rule my father taught me. Never look away first. Not because it wins a fight, but because it tells the other side you are not afraid, even when you are. The bag was old canvas, faded green, with a small tear near the bottom that I had stitched myself more than once. It was heavier than it looked, and I never let it leave my side. Not in training, not in my sleeping quarters, not even in the shower stalls where cadets usually left their things on a bench outside. I found an empty table near the back of the hall and sat down. Nobody joined me. That was fine. I had not come here to make friends. I had come here because 6 years ago, on a small human colony called Meridian, a Draith raiding party burned half a settlement to the ground, and my father did not come home. I picked up my tray and started eating, keeping my eyes low but aware, the way he taught me. Watch everything without staring at anything. That was when I felt them before I saw them. 5 cadets from the Draith warrior caste walked into the hall together, moving the way predators move when they know nobody in the room can challenge them. They were tall, easily 2 heads taller than me, with gray armored skin and shoulders built like they were carved from stone. Other cadets moved out of their path without being asked. The one in front had pale yellow eyes and a long scar running down the side of his jaw. He walked with his chin lifted, like the room belonged to him. Behind him came 4 others, just as large, just as confident, spreading out like they were used to taking up as much space as possible. They stopped near my table, not by accident. I could tell that immediately. The leader looked down at me, then at my tray, then at my bag resting against my leg under the table. "You are the human," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stone grinding against stone. It was not a question. I did not answer right away. I finished chewing, swallowed, and looked up at him calmly. "Ethan," I said, "and you are?" A few nearby cadets laughed nervously, the kind of laugh people give when they are surprised someone dared to speak so plainly to a Draith. The leader's eyes narrowed slightly, but a small smile crossed his face, like he found my calmness amusing rather than threatening. "Vorak," he said, "you should be careful how you speak to me, small one. Your species has no standing here. You are permitted to attend this academy only because of a political agreement between your government and the Kryvex Alliance. Nothing more." I kept my expression steady. Inside, my heart was beating faster, but I had learned a long time ago that showing fear only invites more of it. "Good thing I am not here for standing," I said. "I am here to train." Vorak studied me for a long moment. Then his gaze shifted downward again, toward my bag. "What is in there?" he asked. "That a human carries it everywhere, even to meals, weapons perhaps, contraband. Something you should not have. Personal items," I said. "Nothing that concerns you." One of the other 4, a broad-shouldered Draith with a cracked tusk, leaned forward and reached toward the bag with 2 thick fingers. I moved my leg slightly, pulling the strap closer, and looked directly into his eyes. "I would not do that," I said quietly. The room went even quieter than before. Somewhere behind me, I heard a tray clatter softly onto a table as another cadet froze mid-motion. The Draith with the cracked tusk paused, glancing at Vorak as if asking permission to continue. Vorak studied me for another long second, clearly deciding whether pushing further was worth the trouble in front of so many witnesses. Then he straightened, waved a hand, and the 4 behind him stepped back. "Another time, human. Vorak said. "This academy has a way of testing every species that walks through its doors. Yours will be no different." They walked away, laughter trailing behind them from their own table across the hall, loud and mocking, clearly meant for me to hear. I sat still for a moment, letting my pulse settle, then continued eating like nothing had happened. But something had happened. I had just made myself a target, and I knew it. Later that evening, I sat alone in my sleeping quarters, a small metal room, barely large enough for a bed, a desk, and a narrow storage locker. I placed the bag on my bed and unzipped it slowly, running my fingers over what was inside before I even looked. A folded piece of fabric, faded and soft from age, a worn leather journal with pages that curled at the corners, a small brass compass that no longer pointed anywhere useful, since it was calibrated for Earth's magnetic field and not whatever this station orbited, and a single photograph, protected inside a thin plastic sleeve, showing a man in a simple field uniform, standing beside a woman and a young boy, all three of them smiling in front of a house with a red door. That man was my father. That boy was me. He had been a soldier, not a famous one, not a decorated one, just a man who volunteered for colonial defense because he believed someone had to. When the Dreyeth raid hit Meridian, he stayed behind to help evacuate families while the rest of the defense line fell apart. He did not make it out. I was 13 when they told me. I remember very little from that day, except the weight of the bag they handed me afterward, the same bag I carried today, containing everything that had survived the fire in his quarters. I did not enlist in this academy for revenge. That is what people always assume when they hear a human story like mine, and it makes them uncomfortable, so they stop asking questions. The truth is simpler and harder to explain. I enlisted because I wanted to understand the kind of person my father was. A man who could have run and chose to stay. I wanted to know if I had that in me too. I zipped the bag closed and set it beside my pillow, the way I did every night. Then I lay back and stared at the ceiling, listening to the distant hum of the station's life support systems, and thought about Vorak's yellow eyes and the way he had looked at my bag like it was something to take. He was not wrong that this academy tested every species. He was wrong, however, about what kind of test I had already passed, long before I ever set foot on this station. Somewhere above me, through layers of metal and glass, real stars moved slowly across the black. I closed my eyes, and for the first time since arriving, I allowed myself a small, quiet thought. Whatever came next, I was ready for it. The academy's morning bell rang sharp and electronic through the corridors, and I was already awake, already dressed, already sitting on the edge of my bed with the bag resting against my knee. Sleep had come slowly the night before, filled with half-formed memories of a burning colony and a man's voice telling me to run while he stayed behind. I splashed water on my face in the small basin attached to my room, looked at myself in the dull metal mirror bolted to the wall, and reminded myself of something simple. I was here to train, not to fight every battle that walked toward me. But I also knew, deep in my chest, that some battles find you whether you look for them or not. I picked up the bag, slung it over my shoulder, and stepped out into the corridor to begin my first full day at Kryvex Interstellar Academy, unaware of exactly how much that day would test the promise I had just made to myself. The training yard at Kryvex Interstellar Academy was a wide-open dome of reinforced metal flooring, ringed by observation platforms where instructors and senior cadets watched every session. On my second day, I stood in that yard for the first time, surrounded by cadets from a dozen different worlds, and felt the same watching silence I had felt in the mess hall the night before. Commander Issa Wren, our lead combat instructor, was a tall Osani woman with 4 arms and a voice that could cut through noise from across the entire dome without a speaker. She called out drill formations, and I moved through them as best I could, adjusting my human body to techniques clearly designed for beings with different proportions and different strengths. I was not the best in the yard that day. I was not the worst either. But I noticed something quickly. Every time I completed a drill correctly, someone would find a reason to say it did not count. Every time my footing shifted even slightly during a stance exercise, a voice from the Dreyeth section of cadets would call it out loudly enough for the instructor to hear. By the end of the first week, I understood exactly what was happening. Vorak and his 4 companions, whose names I had since learned were Korg, Brun, Dessa, and Illich, had decided that harassing me was now a daily activity, something to fill the space between real training. It started small. My equipment locker would be found unlocked in the morning, its contents rearranged just enough to waste my time searching for things. My meal tray would sometimes disappear from the table the moment I turned my back, only to reappear empty somewhere across the hall. During sparring rotations, I was somehow always paired against the largest cadets available, while smaller matchups seemed to happen for everyone else. I said nothing about any of it. Complaining would have made things worse, and worse, it would have proven exactly what they wanted to prove, that I could not handle myself without help. There was one cadet, however, who did not join in. Her name was Kaylin, a lean, quick-moving Visari woman with pale blue skin and sharp, intelligent eyes, assigned to the same training squad as me. She rarely spoke during drills, but I noticed she watched everything closely, the same way I did. On the 5th day, during a break between combat theory lectures, she sat down near me in the yard, close enough to speak without being overheard. "You do not fight back," she said, not as a question. "Not yet," I said. "They will keep pushing," she said. "That is what Dreyth warrior caste cadets do. It is part of their culture. Strength is proven through dominance, and dominance is proven by breaking someone weaker in front of witnesses." "I am not planning to be broken," I said. Kaylin studied me for a moment, then glanced toward my bag, sitting beside me on the bench. "They talk about that bag," she said. "Vorak believes there are hidden weapons inside. Illegal technology. Something that would get you removed from the academy if discovered." "There is nothing like that in it," I said. "I believe you," she said simply. "But belief does not matter to them. They want a reason, and if they cannot find one, they will create one." I did not respond right away. I looked out across the training yard, where Vorak and his group were finishing a drill of their own, moving with practiced coordination that made it clear they had trained together for years before ever arriving at this academy. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked her. Kaylin considered the question for a long moment, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly, as if deciding how honest to be. "Because I have watched them do this before," she said. "To a cadet from the Torel colonies, 2 years ago. He left the academy within a month. I do not think you should leave." That surprised me more than anything else she had said. I looked at her, waiting for more, but she only stood, gathered her things, and walked back toward the lecture hall without another word. Over the following days, the harassment grew bolder. During a live simulation exercise, meant to test squad coordination under pressure, my equipment was somehow reconfigured the night before so that half my sensors failed the moment the simulation began. I completed the exercise anyway, relying on instinct and observation instead of the broken technology, and still finished with a passing score, though far lower than it should have been. Instructor Wren pulled me aside afterward, her 4 arms crossed as she studied the data readout from my simulation run. "Your equipment shows signs of tampering," she said. "This is a serious violation of academy conduct if true." "I cannot prove who did it," I said. "I would rather not make accusations I cannot support." She studied me for a long moment, clearly unconvinced by my answer, but unwilling to push further without evidence. "Report any future incidents immediately," she said. "I will not tolerate sabotage in my training yard, regardless of species." I nodded and walked away, aware that Vorak had been watching the entire exchange from across the yard, a small, satisfied smile on his face. That night, I sat in my quarters with the bag open on my bed, going through the contents slowly, the way I often did when I needed to think. I picked up the worn journal and opened it to a page near the middle, filled with my father's handwriting, notes he had written during his own military training decades earlier on Earth. One line, underlined twice, caught my attention the way it always did. Control is not the absence of anger. Control is choosing when anger is allowed to speak. I read it 3 times, closed the journal, and placed it carefully back inside the bag. The following week brought the incident that finally pushed things toward a breaking point. During a mandatory sparring session, cadets were paired based on a randomized system meant to ensure fairness across different species and skill levels. When the pairings were announced, I found myself matched against Brune, the largest of Vorak's group, a Draith cadet nearly twice my body weight, with a reputation for sending sparring partners to the medical bay more often than any other cadet in our squad. I suspected immediately that the pairing had not been random. Kaylin, standing nearby, gave me a small, worried glance, and I understood she suspected the same thing. The match began in the padded sparring ring under Instructor Wren's direct supervision. Brune moved toward me slowly at first, clearly expecting an easy victory, testing my reactions with a few probing strikes that I managed to block or deflect using techniques my father had taught me years before I ever considered enlisting. As the match continued, Brune grew visibly frustrated that I was not simply standing still and absorbing hits the way he seemed to expect. He began moving faster, more aggressively, and I focused entirely on defense, redirecting his momentum rather than meeting his strength directly, exactly as I had been trained. Near the end of the match, Brune overextended on a heavy strike, and I used the opening to sweep his leading leg, sending him off balance long enough to end the exchange with a controlled takedown that left him on the mat, not injured but clearly embarrassed in front of the entire watching squad. The training yard went quiet. Then, slowly, a few scattered cadets from other species began to clap, softly at first, then more openly. Brune stood up quickly, his face darkened with anger, and looked across the ring toward Vorak, who was watching from the sidelines with an expression I had not seen on him before. Not amusement, not mockery, something colder. Instructor Wren called the match, declared it fairly won, and moved on to the next pairing without further comment. But I felt the shift in the air immediately. What had been simple harassment over the past week had just become something more personal, something that Vorak would not be able to ignore in front of his own group. Later that evening, as I walked back toward my quarters carrying my bag, Kaylin caught up to me in the corridor, walking quickly to match my pace. "You should not have embarrassed him like that," she said quietly. "I did not embarrass him," I said. "He embarrassed himself. I simply did not fall down when he expected me to." "To them, that is the same thing," she said. "Vorak's pride is tied to his group. If one of them looks weak, it reflects on all of them, especially in front of other species. He will not let this go quietly." I stopped walking and looked at her. "What do you think he will do?" I asked. Kaylin hesitated, glancing down the corridor to make sure no one else was within earshot. "I do not know exactly," she said, "but I know Draith warrior culture well enough to guess. They will look for the one thing that matters most to you, the one thing you protect above everything else, and they will try to take it, or destroy it, in front of as many witnesses as possible. It restores their pride by proving they can break what you value most." I felt a cold weight settle in my chest as I looked down at the bag on my shoulder. "They already know what that is," I said quietly. Kaylin followed my gaze, and understanding crossed her face. "Then be careful, Ethan," she said. "Very careful." She walked away down the corridor, leaving me standing alone under the dim overhead lighting, my hand resting instinctively on the worn strap of my father's old bag. I did not sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vorak's cold expression from the edge of the sparring ring, and I understood, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that whatever came next would not be another small provocation. It would be the moment everything I had been holding back would finally be tested. 3 days after the sparring match, the Academy announced a mandatory assembly in the central corridor connecting the training dome to the cadet housing wing. Every squad was required to pass through at a scheduled time to review updated conduct policies posted on the main information boards. It meant, for a short window, that nearly every cadet on the station would be moving through the same crowded space at once. I did not think much of it when I first read the notice. I gathered my things that morning as usual, checked that the bag was secured properly over my shoulder, and made my way toward the corridor with the rest of my squad. Kaylin walked beside me, quieter than usual, her eyes scanning the crowd ahead of us with the same alertness I had come to recognize in her over the past 2 weeks. "They know about the assembly," she said quietly, close enough that only I could hear her. "Everyone will be in that corridor at the same time. It is the perfect place for something to happen, where there will be many witnesses, but no clear place to hide, and no easy way for instructors to intervene quickly." "You think they planned this around the schedule?" I said. "I think Vorak has been waiting for an opportunity like this since the sparring match," she said. "Stay close to the wall if you can. Fewer directions for them to come from." I nodded, appreciating the advice, even though I already understood, deep down, that if Vorak intended to act, no amount of positioning would prevent it entirely. He had chosen his moment, and I would have to deal with whatever came. The corridor was long and wide, built to handle heavy foot traffic between the 2 largest sections of the academy. Overhead lighting ran in even strips along the ceiling, and information boards lined both walls, displaying scrolling text about updated conduct policies that almost nobody was actually reading. Cadets moved through in loose clusters, grouped by squad, species, and friendship, filling the space with overlapping conversation and the low hum of dozens of different languages. I kept close to the wall, just as Kaylin suggested, moving steadily with the flow of the crowd. For a while, nothing happened. I began to wonder if perhaps I had misjudged the situation, if perhaps Vorak had decided the sparring match was enough humiliation for 1 week and had chosen to let things settle. That hope lasted until I saw them ahead, near the midpoint of the corridor, exactly where the crowd was thickest, and the information boards created a natural bottleneck that slowed everyone's pace. Vorak stood at the center, arms crossed, his pale yellow eyes fixed directly on me the moment I came into view. Korg and Illich stood to his left, Brune and Dessa to his right, spread out just enough to block a clean path forward without looking, to any casual observer, like they were doing anything more than standing together in conversation. Kaylin's hand brushed my arm lightly. "This is it," she murmured. "Stay calm." I kept walking. Turning back or trying to find another route would have accomplished nothing except delaying an outcome that felt, by now, inevitable. Better to meet it directly, on my own terms, than to let it catch me from behind later. As I approached, the crowd around us seemed to sense something building, the way people often do without fully understanding why. Conversations nearby grew quieter. A few cadets slowed their pace, curious, while others deliberately created distance, unwilling to be caught in whatever was about to happen. Vorak stepped forward, positioning himself directly in my path. "Human," he said, his voice carrying easily over the corridor noise. "We have unfinished business from the training yard." "I do not believe we do," I said, keeping my voice level. "The match was fair," Instructor Wren confirmed it. "The match was an embarrassment," Vorak said, his voice hardening. "You made Brune look weak in front of the entire squad. Among my people, that requires correction." "That sounds like a problem between you and Brune," I said. "It has nothing to do with me." A ripple of quiet laughter passed through some of the watching cadets, and I saw Brune's jaw tighten with anger. Vorak's expression darkened further, and he took another step closer, close enough now that I had to tilt my head slightly to maintain eye contact with him. "You think you understand strength because you avoided one fall in a training ring," Vorak said. "You do not. Strength is not measured in careful footwork and clever redirection. Strength is measured in what you are willing to protect, and what happens when that protection fails." His eyes moved deliberately to my bag. I felt my pulse quicken, but I kept my breathing steady, exactly the way my father had taught me to during moments of pressure. In, slow, controlled. Out, slow, controlled. "This does not involve my bag," I said quietly. Everything involves your bag, Vorak said. You carry it like it is more important than your own training, more important than your own squad. The others believe you hide something valuable inside. Weapons, perhaps. Contraband technology from your primitive world. I intend to find out. There is nothing illegal inside, I said. You have no right to search it. I have every right, Vorak said, his voice rising slightly, enough for the crowd around us to hear clearly. Academy conduct policy permits inspection of any cadet's belongings if there is reasonable suspicion of contraband. I am simply exercising that right, human. Unless, of course, you have something to hide. It was a clever trap, and I recognized it immediately. If I refused outright, it would look, to everyone watching, like I truly did have something to hide, exactly the narrative Vorak wanted to build. If I allowed it, he would have an excuse to touch, examine, and likely damage the one thing in this entire station that still connected me to my father. Kaylin, standing just behind my shoulder, spoke up, her voice steady despite the tension around us. Conduct policy requires an instructor present for any belongings inspection, she said. You know this, Vorak. What you are describing is not an inspection, it is intimidation. Vorak's eyes flicked toward her briefly, unbothered. Then perhaps someone should summon an instructor, he said, his tone almost mocking. Until then, I see no reason to wait. He reached forward, his large gray hand moving toward the strap of my bag. Everything in me wanted to step back, to pull away, to protect it the way I had protected it every single day since I was 13 years old. But stepping back in front of this many witnesses would only confirm every assumption Vorak wanted the crowd to make. I forced myself to stay still, my eyes locked on his. I am asking you, one final time, I said, my voice quiet but clear enough for everyone nearby to hear. Do not touch it. Something in my tone must have registered, because for just a moment, Vorak's hand paused in the air between us. I saw a flicker of something cross his expression, not quite hesitation, but close to it, the way a predator sometimes pauses when prey does not behave the way it is supposed to. Then his pride, or perhaps his need to prove something in front of his own group, overcame that flicker of doubt. His fingers closed around the strap, and in one sharp motion, he yanked the bag off my shoulder. The strap tore free with a sound that seemed impossibly loud in that crowded corridor, though I knew, rationally, that it was simply the silence around us that made it feel that way. Every conversation nearby stopped completely. Every eye in the immediate area turned toward the bag now held in Vorak's grip, and toward me, standing suddenly empty-handed for the first time in 6 years. Vorak held it up, turning it over in his hands with a triumphant expression, glancing toward his 4 companions, who moved closer, eager to see whatever was about to be revealed. Let us see what a human considers so precious, he said loudly, addressing the crowd as much as me, his fingers already working at the zipper. I felt something shift inside me in that moment, something that had been carefully, deliberately controlled for 6 long years, ever since a stranger in uniform had handed a 13-year-old boy a folded piece of fabric and told him his father was not coming home. My father's voice echoed in my memory, from a page in a worn leather journal I had read 100 times. Control is not the absence of anger. Control is choosing when anger is allowed to speak. I looked at Vorak, at his hand pulling the zipper open, at the small brass compass, and the folded fabric, and the photograph beginning to spill into view for a crowd of strangers who understood nothing about what any of it meant. And for the first time since arriving at this academy, I allowed myself to stop holding back. Put it down, I said. My voice was quiet, quieter than anything I had said to him before, but something in it made Vorak's hands still completely, made Korg and Illik glance at each other uncertainly, made even Kaylin, standing beside me, take a small, careful step back. Vorak looked up from the bag, meeting my eyes, and whatever he saw there made the confident smile on his face falter for just a moment. Or what, he said, though his voice carried less certainty than it had a moment before. I did not answer with words. I stepped forward, Time slowed the way it sometimes does when a decision has already been made somewhere deep inside you, long before your body catches up to it. I was aware of everything at once. The crowd pulling back to widen the space around us. The hum of the overhead lighting. The weight of 6 years of restraint finally releasing, not as rage but as absolute clarity. Vorak was still holding my bag when I closed the distance between us. He had expected me to shout, perhaps, or to grab uselessly at the bag the way a smaller, weaker creature might. He had not expected me to move directly into his space with total control. My hand closed around his wrist before he could react, my fingers finding the same pressure point my father had drilled into me during countless quiet evenings in our backyard, years before I understood why he insisted on teaching a young boy such things. I twisted sharply, redirecting the angle of his own arm against the natural limit of his joint. Vorak's grip on the bag released instantly, a sharp sound of surprise escaping him as his balance shifted. I caught the bag with my free hand before it could fall, looped the torn strap once around my forearm, and used the same motion to guide his stumbling body past me, off balance, directly into the open space the crowd had cleared. He hit the floor hard, more from the force of his own weight working against him than from anything I had truly done to him. The sound of it echoed through the silent corridor. For 1 full second nobody moved. Then Korg, the closest of the remaining 4, let out a low growl and lunged toward me. I had exactly enough time to set my bag down against the wall behind me before he reached me. Korg fought with raw power, throwing his weight into wide, heavy strikes meant to overwhelm through sheer force. I did not try to match that force directly. Instead, I moved sideways, letting his momentum carry him past me, and used the flat of my palm against his extended arm to guide him into the information board mounted on the corridor wall. The board cracked under the impact, and Korg staggered back, dazed, his balance completely gone. A quick sweep of his lead leg sent him down beside Vorak, both of them now on the ground, groaning, struggling to reorient themselves. 2 seconds had passed, maybe 3. Illick came next, faster than the others, clearly trying to catch me off guard while I was still recovering my stance from the previous exchange. I turned just in time, catching his incoming strike on my forearm and absorbing the impact by rolling with it rather than resisting it directly, a technique my father called giving way to take control. As Illick overextended from the missed strike, I used the momentum of my turn to drive my elbow into the center of his chest, not with brutal force, but with precise placement, exactly where it would knock the breath from his lungs and disrupt his balance completely. He doubled over, gasping, and a follow-up sweep sent him down to join his 2 companions on the corridor floor. 4 seconds. 5. Brune and Dessa exchanged a brief, uncertain glance, clearly recalculating whatever plan they had walked into this corridor with. Brune, still carrying wounded pride from our earlier sparring match, charged forward first, throwing caution aside entirely. I recognized his pattern immediately, the same overextension that had cost him our first match. I sidestepped his heavy strike, caught his extended arm, and used his own forward momentum to guide him into a controlled takedown, sweeping his legs out from under him with practiced precision. He landed hard, the impact knocking the fight out of him instantly, joining the growing pile of Dreyeth cadets now scattered across the corridor floor. 6 seconds. 7. Dessa hesitated, watching her 4 companions on the ground around her, and for a moment I thought she might step back entirely. Instead, perhaps driven by the same warrior culture pride Kalen had warned me about, she moved forward with a different approach, faster and more calculated than the others, clearly trying to close the distance before I could set my stance. I met her halfway, catching her leading strike against my open palm, redirecting the force downward and inward rather than blocking it directly. Using the leverage created by her own committed movement, I guided her past me in a controlled arc, releasing her at the precise moment needed to send her tumbling gently but firmly to the floor beside the others. 8 seconds. 9. I straightened, breathing steadily, controlled, my father's voice still echoing somewhere in the back of my mind. Not with pride, not with satisfaction, simply with the quiet clarity of someone who had done exactly what needed to be done, and nothing more. 10 seconds. The corridor was completely silent, except for the low groans of 5 Draeth cadets scattered across the floor around me, none of them seriously harmed in any lasting way, but all of them thoroughly, undeniably defeated in front of every witness who had gathered to watch the assembly notice board that morning. I bent down, picked up my bag from where I had set it against the wall, and slung the torn strap carefully over my shoulder, checking with my fingers that everything inside was still secure. The compass, the journal, the folded fabric, the photograph, all of it exactly where it belonged. The silence in the corridor held for what felt like a very long time before the first sound of running footsteps echoed from the far end, followed quickly by the sharp electronic wail of the Academy's alert system activating overhead. Instructor Wren arrived first, moving through the parting crowd with all 4 arms already raised, taking in the scene with wide, startled eyes. 5 Draeth warrior caste cadets, each individually known for their strength and combat training, lay scattered across the corridor floor, groaning, disoriented, and completely unable to explain, in that first confused moment, exactly what had happened to them. And standing quietly in the center of it all, breathing steadily, his bag secured once again over his shoulder, was the smallest, softest-looking cadet in the entire academy. Instructor Wren's gaze moved slowly from the fallen cadets to me, and I saw something shift in her expression, somewhere between disbelief and a question she was not yet ready to ask out loud. "Cole," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled, "you will come with me, now." I nodded once, glanced briefly at Kaylin, who was watching me with an expression I could not quite read, and followed the instructor down the corridor, leaving behind a stunned crowd of cadets and 5 thugs who had learned, in exactly 10 seconds, that some things were never meant to be touched. The Academy's administrative office was smaller than I expected, a quiet room lined with data screens and soft blue lighting, a stark contrast to the chaos I had just walked away from. Instructor Wren led me inside and gestured for me to sit across from a wide desk, then took her place behind it, her 4 arms folding in front of her as she studied a datapad in silence. I sat quietly, my bag resting against my leg, waiting for whatever came next. I had expected anger. I had expected the Academy to move quickly toward expulsion, given that 5 cadets had ended up requiring medical attention because of something that happened directly in front of dozens of witnesses. "The corridor's security recording has already been reviewed," Wren said finally, not looking up from the datapad. "Every angle, every second." "I understand," I said. "I am prepared to explain myself, if that is required." She looked up at me then, and her expression was not what I expected. Not anger, something closer to careful, controlled curiosity. "Explain to me," she said, "how a cadet with no prior formal combat rating managed to disable 5 warrior caste cadets, each larger and heavier than yourself, in under 10 seconds, without causing a single serious or lasting injury to any of them." I paused, considering how to answer honestly without sounding like I was making excuses. "I did not want to hurt them," I said. "I wanted to stop them. There is a difference, and my training focused on knowing exactly where that line was." "Your training," Wren repeated. "Academy records show no formal combat certification prior to your enrollment here." "Not from any academy," I said. "My father trained me. He served in colonial defense on Earth before he died, protecting Meridian Colony from a Draeth raid 6 years ago. He believed that real control was not about how hard you could hit something. It was about knowing exactly how much force a situation actually required, and never using more than that." Wren was quiet for a long moment, studying me with an expression I could not fully read. "The recording shows you gave a clear verbal warning before any physical action was taken," she said. "Multiple witnesses confirm this as well. It also shows that Cadet Vorak initiated physical contact first, by forcibly removing a personal item from your possession, without proper procedural authorization." "That is correct," I said. Academy conduct policy is very clear regarding unauthorized searches and physical confrontation between cadets, Ren continued. Based on the evidence reviewed, this incident will be recorded as justified defensive action on your part, taken only after repeated provocation and a direct physical violation. Cadets Vorak, Korg, Brun, Illich, and Dessa will face formal disciplinary review for their actions, in addition to their required medical recovery. I felt something loosen slightly in my chest, a tension I had not fully realized I was carrying. "Thank you," I said quietly. Ren set the datapad down and studied me for a long moment before speaking again, her tone shifting from formal to something more genuinely curious. "I have served as a combat instructor at this academy for 11 years, she said. "I have trained cadets from over 30 species. I have never seen anyone move the way you did in that recording. Every strike, every redirection, calculated to control rather than to harm. That is not simply technique, Cole. That reflects discipline most seasoned soldiers never fully develop." I did not know how to respond to that, so I said nothing, simply meeting her gaze. "May I ask," she said, glancing briefly toward the bag resting against my leg, "what exactly was worth defending so strongly that you were willing to risk academy discipline over it?" I hesitated, then reached down and unzipped the bag slowly, pulling out the small brass compass first, holding it up so she could see it clearly. "This belonged to my father," I said. "It does not even work properly here, since it was calibrated for Earth's magnetic field. But he carried it through every deployment he ever served. It was in his pocket the day he died." I set the compass down gently on the desk and pulled out the worn leather journal next. "His personal notes," I said, "things he learned during his own service. Things he wanted me to understand, even after he was gone." Finally, I pulled out the folded fabric, unfolding it carefully to reveal a small human flag, its edges worn soft from age, and the protected photograph beneath it, showing a young family standing together in front of a house with a red door. "This is everything that survived after the colony was rebuilt," I said quietly. "It is not weapons, it is not contraband technology, it is simply all I have left of him." Ren studied the items on her desk for a long moment, her expression softening in a way I had not seen from her before. "Vorak believed you were hiding something dangerous," she said quietly. "I was," I said, "just not the kind of dangerous he expected." A faint, almost imperceptible smile crossed Ren's face before she carefully composed her expression again. "You are dismissed from this meeting with no disciplinary action recorded against you," she said. "I would, however, strongly encourage you to consider formal combat certification testing. Based on what I witnessed in that recording, I believe you would perform exceptionally well." I gathered my father's belongings, placed them carefully back into the bag, and stood to leave. "I will consider it," I said. As I stepped out of the administrative office, I found Kaylin waiting quietly in the corridor outside, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. "I heard the disciplinary review already concluded in your favor," she said. "Word travels fast on this station." "It seems that way," I said. She fell into step beside me as I began walking back toward the cadet housing wing, and for a while, neither of us spoke. The station around us felt different somehow, though nothing physical had changed. Cadets we passed in the corridors glanced at me differently now, not with the dismissive indifference or quiet mockery I had grown used to over the past 2 weeks, but with something closer to careful, curious respect. "You know," Kaylin said eventually, "most cadets on this station believed humans were the weakest species enrolled here. Physically unimpressive, slow, fragile compared to nearly everyone else." "And now?" I asked. "Now," she said, "I think several hundred cadets are going to spend tonight reconsidering everything they believed they understood about your species." I allowed myself a small, quiet smile at that, the first genuine one I had felt in days. Over the following weeks, the story of what happened in that corridor spread quickly across the entire academy, growing slightly more exaggerated with each retelling, though the core of it remained true enough that nobody bothered correcting the details. Cadets from species I had never even spoken to before began greeting me by name in the mess hall. Training partners who once avoided sparring with me now specifically requested matches, eager to test themselves against the human who had, according to station rumor, sent 5 warrior caste cadets to the medical bay in less time than it took most cadets to complete a single combat drill. Vorak and his group returned to training 3 weeks later, their formal disciplinary review complete, required to attend additional conduct workshops before being permitted back into regular squad activities. I saw Vorak once in the mess hall during that first week back, and for a long moment, our eyes met across the room. He did not approach me. He did not offer any kind of apology, and I had not expected one. But there was something different in the way he looked at me now, something that had not been present during our first encounter weeks earlier. Not respect, exactly. Not yet. But recognition, at least, that he had badly misjudged what he was dealing with. I nodded once toward him, a small neutral acknowledgement, and returned to my meal. He held my gaze a moment longer, then looked away first, something I noted quietly but did not comment on to anyone. Kalen and I continued training together in the weeks that followed, and I found myself, for the first time since arriving at Kryvek's Interstellar Academy, actually building something that resembled real friendship rather than simple survival. She never asked me again about the specific details of my father's death, though she had clearly pieced together enough from what I had shared to understand the shape of it, and she never pushed for more than I was willing to give. Nearly a month after the corridor incident, as I was finishing an evening training session alone in the yard, a figure I did not immediately recognize approached from the observation platform above, descending the access stairs with slow, measured steps. He wore the formal insignia of a senior fleet commander, a rank far above anything I had interacted with directly since arriving at the academy. He was an older Osani, similar in build to Instructor Ren, but with silver markings across his shoulders, indicating decades of active service. He stopped a short distance away, studying me with an expression that gave away very little. "Cadet Cole," he said, his voice calm and measured. "I reviewed the corridor recording personally, along with your instructor's full report." "Sir," I said, straightening slightly, uncertain what this meeting was about. "Your technique is unusual," he said. "Efficient, controlled, not the raw brute strength most species rely on, nor the aggressive dominance display common among certain warrior cultures. Something more precise, more deliberate." "My father taught me," I said simply. "I am aware," the commander said. I looked into his service record after reading the report. Colonial Defense, Meridian Colony, a difficult engagement, from what limited records survive. I said nothing, unsure where this conversation was heading, but a quiet, careful curiosity beginning to build inside me. "There is a program," the commander said finally, "not widely known outside senior command circles, designed to identify cadets with exceptional adaptive combat instincts, individuals capable of thinking clearly and acting decisively under extreme pressure, regardless of species or conventional training background. It requires additional evaluation before formal acceptance is considered." He studied me for a long moment before continuing. "I believe you may be exactly the kind of cadet that program was designed to find," he said. "Consider it, Cadet Cole. Formal evaluation begins next month, should you choose to accept." He turned and began walking back toward the access stairs, leaving me standing alone in the quiet training yard, my father's bag resting securely over my shoulder, the compass and journal and folded fabric inside it exactly where they belonged. I looked up at the artificial stars projected across the dome's ceiling, thinking of a house with a red door, and a man who had once told a young boy that control was not the absence of anger, but the choice of when anger was finally allowed to speak. Whatever this new program turned out to be, I already knew, standing there in the quiet training yard, that I was ready to find out.